Welcome back to the Donkey Vote Political Podcast. We have another interview via Zoom today, and today we have Chris Crewther. I'm pronouncing that correctly, am I? Or
Uh, Crwther. So Crwth
Crewther,
is a Welsh
Crewther.
Welsh musical instrument, which is spelled
Ah,
Crwth. But it actually it's sort of like a cassette. It was popular back in the day, and then the violin came in, which was like the CDs and the DVDs and everything else, and that took over the cassettes, and it became unpopular after that. So
yeah,
right, so Crwther. Yep.
yeah, Chris Crewther. Yeah.
Yep.
So Chris,
Yes.
thank you for joining us today.
No worries,
If you,
friends.
yeah, if you could give the audience a little bit of a brief description of who you are, because I'm going to assume not many of them would know who you are. So if you could just give a little brief description of yourself for the audience, that'd be great.
Yeah. So my name is Chris Crewther. I am the member for Mornington in the Victorian Parliament. I'm also Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Justice and Corrections and Liberal Party Whip in the Legislative Assembly. I'm married to Grace, and we've been married since 2009, and we have two young kids, an 8-year-old daughter, Yasmin, and a 4-year-old son, Eddie, although he's about to turn 5 in 3 days' time. So I
Oh,
won't be able to say that for much longer.
happy birthday
Um,
for Eddie.
Thanks, Francis. So we live in Mount Eliza, which is in the Mornington electorate. The Mornington electorate is at the start of the Mornington Peninsula, so it covers like Mount Eliza, Mornington, Mount Martha, Murdoch, Toorong, and a little bit of Baxter. And originally, I've had a bit of a varied career. I graduated from a law degree and did 2 master's degrees in international law and diplomacy. Also did a science minor as part of that undergraduate degree as well. I've worked as what have I done? I've been a magistrate's associate. I've worked as a lawyer in public and private practice. I've worked as a project manager for IATSIS up in Canberra. I have been the CEO of Mildura Development Corporation. I've worked through the UN in Kosovo as an international lawyer at the Kosovo Property Agency. I've worked more recently as the head of strategic partnerships for the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery and run my own business as well. So a bit of a varied career, but even growing up, I grew up originally in Horsham in Western Victoria, which is where my parents and my brother and his partner still live. So I grew up surrounded by farms and come from a sort of semi-farming background, although I grew up in town. So I've worked on farms and done a whole range of other things as well.
Hmm. Very interesting that you spent a lot of time in Horsham. So you did your your schooling there, or
Yeah, I did all my schooling, all the primary school and secondary school in Horsham and a little town called Matoa, which is
ah
down the road from Horsham.
ah great,
Yep.
great. Yeah.
Which
So well
used
now.
to take us about half an hour by a bus. So we used to get the bus every morning
Oh
and
wow.
a little
Yeah, that was very
uh,
similar to because we interviewed Tim Bull, who was the national a couple of days ago when we were in Parliament,
yep.
and he was telling us as well because for high school he had to go to one of the more in the Gippsland area to go to one of the bigger towns, and he had to take a minibus,
Yep.
which is about 30 minutes away.
Oh,
So
okay.
I think
Yep.
I think it's a very country thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I used to work. I started working when I was about 11, and I was doing the paper rounds and so forth. So I used to do that around up to 6 mornings a week, starting around 4 a.m. Finished that by 7 or 7:30. Get home, get changed, ride my bike back to the a local primary school in Horsham, and then would wait for this big tinkering green and orange buses to take us the half an hour drive to Matoa to go to school. So in grade 7 and 8. So that was fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Probably got used to it, part of like your morning routine, and getting home as well, like waking up 30
Yeah. Well,
minutes
I think
earlier.
I woke up earlier back then than I do now.
I mean,
Yeah.
Parliament normally you have to get there normally like 8 a.m., right? Or what?
Uh, yeah, you have to get there at an early time, but because I'm the whip, I have to start often earlier than a lot of colleagues as well.
Oh yeah, true. Because
Although
you've
I'm
got
sure
to.
shadow ministers are the same as well, because we'll have to change things and prepare things for the parliament for the day. And I'm often in the chamber sorting things out and herding cats, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, because I think we were talking to Joe McCracken a couple of days ago, and he's
Yep.
the whip for you
The
guys in
upper
the
house.
legislative council. So yeah,
Yes,
like you
yes,
guys have to you both have to organize when everyone's speaking, that sort of thing.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
All right
Yep.
then.
And ensure everyone's there and everything else.
Yeah. You don't want
Yep.
people missing right before they're supposed to be speaking.
No. Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
All right then. We'll get started now with our question. So the first question is how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments?
Yeah, well, I guess I mentioned before, one of the memorable moments was getting the tinkering green and orange buses across the Matoa when I was at secondary school there. But I did have the opportunity when I was living in Horsham to do youth parliament in year 11 and year 12. So I did the Victorian Youth Parliament in year 11, and then I did the Australian Youth Parliament in year 12. And that was actually held at Camp Manyang in Mount Eliza, which is in the area that I represent now at the state level. But coincidentally, I did the federal and the Victorian Youth Parliaments both at Camp Manyang in Mount Eliza, and I've now been the representative of Parliament at the federal level for Mount Eliza from 2016 to 19, and now
Oh yeah,
covering
for
Mount Eliza
Dunkley.
as a state representative. So it's very
Yeah.
coincidental or ironic in a way that I did that from Horsham in Western Victoria in the area that I now represent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually very interesting. I think you were actually
Yes.
my aunt's local member for a bit because she's in the
Oh
federal seat
yes.
of
Yes.
Dunkley. So yeah, that's
Yes.
actually
Yes. Yes.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
And I did forget to mention I was the federal member for Dunkley before when you asked me about my background from 2016 until 19, and I was also the chair of the Foreign Affairs and Aid subcommittee through that as well. So that was a good process, and instigated Australia's Modern Slavery Act, which brought about instigated Australia's Modern Slavery Inquiry, which brought about Australia's Modern Slavery Act, which is an area that I'm quite passionate about as well. I forgot to mention that when you were asking about
It's
the
fine. It's
background.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other memorable moments outside of taking the red and green buses to school?
Yeah, well, I did mention the youth parliament. That was pretty memorable. Used to be rabbits running around in the back over when in Matoa, and it was it was definitely a varied upbringing, and got to experience the country and lots of different things. So it was a good upbringing in a way as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
I can't really remember much else.
I guess everything else that you don't remember is not that important. Wasn't
It
that
doesn't mean it's not
important.
important, but my memory tests me at the best of times.
All right then. Yeah.
Yep.
We'll move on now to our second question. This is actually a pre-recorded from Tobias.
Before politics, you used to work as a lawyer for the Commonwealth Department of Agriculture and even the United Nations. Can you briefly talk to us about your work as a lawyer? And second,
Did you hear that, Chris? Or
Yeah, I heard it enough. So he was asking about my previous work as a lawyer
yeah,
in private and public practice, and through the United Nations as well.
yeah.
I haven't worked as a lawyer now since 2012, so I took a
Oh
bit of
wow.
a different trajectory. But I guess being in Parliament, you're dealing with the making of laws, so and the legislative processes. So the law degree certainly helps. And a lot of people say there's too many lawyers in politics, but at the state level, there's only, I think, 3 or maybe 4 on the whole of the coalition side who have a law degree. Probably four at most, I'd say.
I know Michael O'Brien's one of them.
Mike O'Brien, John Pasuto, I think James Newbury, possibly Jess Wilson.
Yeah.
There might be 5 or so that I can think of offhand. So there's probably I'd say a lack of lawyers these days, at least in the state parliamentary team. But it's good to have people from all varied backgrounds. Probably the most interesting role I had in the past was working as an international lawyer through the United Nations in Kosovo. So I was working there at a place called the Kosovo Property Agency, which sounds like a real estate firm, but it's not. So we were dealing with property claims for people who lost possession of their property due to the war in the late 90s. So we were dealing with about 43,000 claims for property for people who lost possession of their farms, their homes, their businesses, and so forth. And we had to basically go through the claims along with a local lawyer. So every case had an international lawyer like myself and a local lawyer that worked on it. But the international lawyer gave the final sign-off to avoid any situations of, I guess, one ethnicity not wanting to return the property of another ethnicity where there might have been a conflict in the past, and to avoid that sort of situation. And we presented about 800 cases every 2 months before an international tribunal. So our role was basically to determine the rightful owner of the property and effectively write the judgment for that, which was then affirmed by the those on the international tribunal when we presented those cases every 2 months. So, and then they'll go through a process to affirm those property rights. So it was a pretty important process to give people their rights back after a conflict. And there's not always the case after many conflicts, and we see in I guess in current conflicts like in Ukraine or Israel, Gaza, and elsewhere, there will be people who are dispossessed of their property, and post-conflict it will be important potentially to hopefully allow them to regain possession, whether that is moving back or just getting the right to rent it out or sell it and so forth. And sometimes the property systems or the cadastral systems are not quite as advanced as in Australia in different countries. Some are very good, but others are lacking, and sometimes the current owner is not the one registered on the title record.
Yeah, it's a pretty big legal debacle there, especially during wars and stuff and that sort of thing.
Yes.
With the whole, who owns what and that sort of thing, with land changing over and that sort of stuff. So, how long did you spend in Kosovo actually?
Nearly 2 years.
So that
I
was
had
just
4 contracts there. Yeah.
So that was just after the war had finished, because I know there still is a bit of conflict between the Serbians and the Kosovoans even to this day.
There's mainly between Kosovo Serbs and Kosovo Albanians. There's a bit of conflict, but it has arisen more recently, and in 2004 and different times, particularly where there is, I guess, enclaves of different communities and separation between different groups. But when I was there, it was pretty stable. I was there between 2010 to 2012, so the conflict ended in the late 90s, and Kosovo had declared independence in 2008. Obviously, their status as a nation is recognised by some nations and not recognised by other nations. But in any event, that was irrelevant to the work that we were doing. Our work was really to affirm the property rights, irrespective of person's ethnicity, and to ensure that they could exercise those property rights. Yep.
Yeah, that is very, very important work, especially as I said before, during transferring of land during wars and that sort of thing. So
and actually, probably the majority of claims were actually from Kosovo Serbs, so people of Serbian background, because a number of people of Albanian background were able to move back and exercise their property rights, whereas it was much more difficult for people of Serbian background post-conflict. So anyway, but it didn't matter who it was, we returned the property rights. So
exactly, and especially with the UN as well, you got to keep that sort of neutral sort of stance. You can't be, I guess, like going towards the Kosovo and Albanians or the Kosovo and Serbians and that sort of thing.
Which is why it was important to have local lawyers to work with us on cases, because we were often dealing with documents that were written in Albanian or Serbian or both. But
I don't think you would know Albanian or Serbian, Chris.
Well, actually, after a while, because they're often legal or title documents, I actually got to learn a lot of the key words, and a lot of the cases, a lot of the documents I could actually read myself in the end, just by knowing where the key words were going to be and where the key information was. So, but yeah, certainly for the first few months, you definitely needed the help of the local lawyer. So, but when you get more complex documents or legal cases, then you definitely couldn't do that myself.
Exactly. So we'll now move on to our third question. So you did touch on this in the intro, but the intro as well. But before running in the seat of Mornington in the 2022 Victorian state election, you were the federal member for Dunkley from 2016 to 2019. What would you say are the main differences between being a federal MP and a state MP?
I've actually found state politics to be even busier than federal politics.
Really? I mean, you're not traveling to Canberra as much.
No, but I probably still spend just as much time away from home, because I still stay in the city when I go down to Parliament, because sometimes you often be working to midnight and up at 6 a.m. So to try and then navigate potentially an hour to an hour and a half driving each way as well, I'm supposed to get no sleep. So I still spend probably just as much time away from the family. I'd say it's busier as well at the state level, because I'm the whip in Parliament, which means during the parliamentary sit-ins, I can't do much constituent work or things outside of the Parliament, because I'm keeping an eye on the chamber and organising the chamber pretty much 95% of the time. Also, at the state level, there are more services. So a lot of these, which means there's more human error. So at the federal level, a lot of the cases I was getting into my office were with Centrelink, Medicare, NDIS, immigration. So where there were processes and human error and so forth. But at the state level, you've got so much more, whether it's local councils and planning processes, or public health scene, or police, ambulance, hospitals, schools. There's a whole range of different services, and therefore, I guess the more humans you get involved, the more risk there is for errors and problems, and the more people then come to see their MP. I think it was extremely busy at the federal level, but I sort of felt like at times I could tread water at the federal level, but I've always felt I'm trying to swim to the top at the state level. So
Yeah.
but yeah, there's a lot of similarities as well, though. In the Mornington electorate, partially covers the seat of Dunkley that I used to represent. So the seat of Dunkley used to cover Mornington, Baxter, and Mount Eliza. Unfortunately, I had a redistribution of boundaries, which was one of the main reasons I lost the seat in 2019. So Mornington and Baxter were taken out of that electorate, and I got Carrum Downs and Skye in exchange. So it turned it from a Liberal seat into a National Labor seat. But Mornington and part of Baxter are in this electorate that I now represent. So I've represented these areas before, which certainly helps, both from a familiarity of what is happening and familiarity of people. So there's a lot of similarity, and people will come to me with local, state, or federal issues. And I'm not going to say to go away. I will help them with their issues, and irrespective of where they're coming from.
Yeah. And especially since as well, I think from probably your experience, you'd probably say state politics is more demanding just because you are probably the whip. And also, you'd probably say that, or
yeah, the whip and the amount of service delivery, which means you get more. Even though I have half the number of constituents as at the federal level, I would say I get just as many issues coming through the door of my office, but you get half the number of staff to deal with those issues. So we get 2.5 staff, whereas at the federal level, you get 4.5 staff dealing with probably a similar amount of issues. So this is where it's probably makes it extremely busier, much busier. So
yeah. And also during your 2016-2019 stint as the member for Dunkley, you were in government, and currently Liberal Party in Victoria is in opposition, so that would be also a bit of a difference.
Yeah, so I guess I've had experience of being a member of the federal government and a member of the state opposition. I also actually stood for, this is actually the 4th election I stood for in 2022. I stood for the first time in the seat of Mallee, which covers Horsham and Matoa, where I grew up, in 2013. Before I stood for the seat of Dunkley. The chance of the Liberal Party winning that seat was probably 1% in Mallee, but
what was the chance?
It was a 3-corner contest. So the main competitor in Mallee in 2013 was the National Party. And then in 2016 and 19, my main competitor was the Labor Party. And then my main competitor was the Teals in 2022. So effectively, I've stood at the state and the federal level against the Nationals, Labor, and the Teals. So
yeah, I mean, you've gone against basically every single major political force in the whole of Australia.
Yeah, almost, yeah.
Maybe next time you run in like some inner city seat, go against the Greens, and you've completed everything.
I think I'll stick to where I am now. So, yeah.
Smart decision.
Yep.
But yeah, we'll move on now to our 4th question. So, Chris, you also talk about your battle with Tourette's, which you were diagnosed with in your early 20s. You are now also a patron to the Tourette Syndrome Association of Australia. Are you able to briefly discuss your experience with Tourette syndrome and your work as a patron for the Tourette Syndrome Australia?
Yeah, so probably from about grade 2, grade 3, I had symptoms of Tourette syndrome, but it wasn't known by those around me or my parents or others as Tourette syndrome. I just sort of got told off for habits and eye blinking and things like that, and got a bit of bullying because of that. In parts of primary school as well. And then when I started going out with my wife, Grace, before she was with my wife, she got to know me and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And anyway, I
still stayed with you, which is good.
Yeah, ended up going through the process to see the necessary people, and they diagnosed me as having Tourette syndrome, which made a bit of sense as to why I had these continual habits since I was in grade 2 or grade 3. And I was diagnosed with that, but I kept it to myself and I didn't tell any colleagues or others other than those who were close with me, like my wife. But when I was elected to federal politics, I thought I'm in a position of responsibility to be an example for people living with Tourette syndrome, that they can achieve anything irrespective of their background or neurodiversity or anything like that. So I decided to publicly announce in Parliament that I had Tourette syndrome, and I set up the Parliamentary Friendship Group for Tourette syndrome to try and advocate for Tourette syndrome. I then advocated for funding for a national conference, and also ongoing funding for Tourette syndrome camps, which is now continuing. That funding was announced when I was a member for Dunkley, but I understand it's continued to this day. And it's a really good program to bring people together, both parents of people with Tourette syndrome, but also siblings and those with Tourette syndrome, to have that support network in place. So I try to use that position I had in federal politics, not only as being an example, but to advocate for better treatment and better recognition and better services for people with Tourette syndrome.
Yeah, so that, are you also planning to have a start something up in state politics as well around Tourette syndrome, or?
I hadn't planned to. I'm still the patron for the Tourette Syndrome Association of Australia, which I've been since, I think, 2017. So if there's opportunities to do things at the state level, then I'm happy to do so. Tourette syndrome, just for your audience, it affects about 1 in 100 children and about 1 in 200 adults. Although in adults, it's partially because of underdiagnosis, such as with myself. But with greater recognition, you do have more children who are properly diagnosed these days, and then they can get the support in place. And symptoms, you have to have multiple motor or vocal tics, so at least one of each. And symptoms can vary from being more severe to more mild. Mine's more on the mild end, but it can flare up and at different times, and the tics can change from time to time as well, and they can vary over time, and they can get worse or better, particularly in stress or watching movies or things like that. It tends to come out a bit more.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if you did, but if you could briefly touch on like your work in the Tourette's Syndrome Australia, like what you guys actually do there. So of course, you guys provide a lot of support and that sort of thing towards people with Tourette's, but what else have you guys been able to do? Or you specifically as the patron?
Yeah. So, well, one thing the couple of things I mentioned before is just being an advocate for raising awareness of Tourette syndrome in the media, even through schools as well. I've talked in local with schools and schools more broadly about Tourette syndrome, but also advocating, whether it is for funding for the national conference, whether it is funding for the Tourette camps. There is no specific medication for those with Tourette syndrome. Not all people with Tourette syndrome need to take medication, but if you have more severe tics, then there may be the need to do so. But there's no clear solution or there's no clear drug specifically for Tourette syndrome. So more research and investment in that area would be good. It's probably an area that is underinvested in. And a lot of people with Tourette syndrome have an overlap of different areas of neurodiversity as well, whether it's being on the autism spectrum or OCD or a whole range of different things. So it's often not just Tourette syndrome that they have.
Yeah. And it's all the better if we get more recognition and we get more awareness. So I do thank you for your patron
recognition,
work
awareness, funding, support, and even just to be an example for children as well, that you can achieve anything in life. You can become a politician or a sports star. Like Billie Eilish has Tourette syndrome, or Dan Aykroyd has Tourette syndrome. There's that singer, what's his name? There's another singer who has Tourette syndrome and he had to stop.
You're the most famous one, Chris. Well. You're the most famous one.
No, by far I'm not. So, but it's just be an example for these young people, and by raising awareness as well, it can help people to be diagnosed earlier as well, instead of people bullying a kid or for habits, or parents or others saying just stop your habits, which can potentially make the situation worse. Then people can become more aware of the situation. So even that just helps. Yeah,
exactly. The more awareness and the more recognition that Tourette syndrome or any other disease or syndrome gets, the better for society in general. So
yes.
we'll now move on to our fifth question. So, who would you say is your political role model slash idol?
I'd say Sir Robert Menzies. And
Classic answer.
well, Sir Robert Menzies is the founder of the Liberal Party, but he's also Australia's longest serving Prime Minister. I think it was the beliefs, the values, and the leadership, and the fact that he stood up for those beliefs and he was able to relate those beliefs to everyday Australians and to work to try and make a difference for a community, whether it is in areas such as enhancing freedom or equality of opportunity for people irrespective of their background and so forth. These are the beliefs that are the founding basis of the Liberal Party. And I think, yeah, he was a person who lived by those beliefs and was able to bring people along with him. And I think, yeah, he was certainly a political hero.
Yeah. Is there anyone else, even maybe in state politics, that you'd say is a little bit of an inspirational role model, or is it just Robert
Currently,
Menzies? I mean, anyone in general.
there's a number of colleagues that different colleagues stand up for different reasons, and some are extremely good at policies and the media releases they put out, such as Bev McArthur's. I don't know, her output's amazing. She puts out I think a media release or article every single day. She could have been a journalist in another life. So she's definitely got an ability in writing and speaking and expressing herself. But there are many others as well, though, who just by their friendly nature, like Renee Heath is the upper house member for the area that I cover, and she's an amazing person in terms of the way she relates to and deals with others. There's so many colleagues that are good in different ways.
Yeah, that's good though.
Yep.
That's great. Yeah, because we spent a lot of time with Renee, and even though when we were in Parliament, she actually invited us into her office, and we were just, we spent like probably 3 or 4 hours in there.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and Renee was great, and there's a lot of pretty bad media press on her as well, and I think it's just really unjustified because she is really a great person. And a great parliamentarian.
She's definitely has had to have a tough skin because she's sometimes targeted just because of who she is.
Yeah.
Or who her family is before she's even expressed an opinion on anything. And sometimes people's opinions are presumed, or people will judge people without them even opening their mouths. So, and I think we need to be a bit more open in politics to allow people from all different views to express their opinions and to freely associate and freely speak their mind, irrespective of what their views are. Obviously, if you refer to sort of guided philosophies related to the Liberal Party as well, it's things like On Liberty by John Stuart Mill are good reads, where you basically allow freedom of thought in it insofar as possible, unless there is a harm to others. So people are advocating violence or advocating or intimidating others and so forth. But you should allow free thought, even if it is thought that offends others.
Exactly. And, the Liberal Party is such as John Howard said, it's such a broad church, it represents people from the conservative side of Australia all the way to the people from the liberal side of Australia. And I think the negative connotations of what I guess the US has placed on conservative and liberals being at each other a lot has, I guess, kind of affected the Liberal Party a bit in Australia. But the Liberal Party is such a broad church, I don't think a lot of people understand that it just represents, all walks of life, all people,
Yeah. And when it was originally founded by, and sorry, you finished first.
Yeah, so I know you can go, you can go, Chris.
I was going to say, when it was originally founded by Sir Robert Menzies in the 1940s, it brought together a range of non-Labor parties all together, so they could be competitive, but it also brought forward different views from conservative and more libertarian perspectives, and there were women's nationalist organisations, and so we're actually quite, if you look at the Liberal Party's constitution as well, we have a female and male position for most positions within the organisational wing of the party, which at the time was, was not something that the Labor Party had, and so there's a lot of background there in history that it did bring together a lot of different people, and I know sometimes we don't always follow our founding beliefs, but when you can refer to that original belief document and what we actually believe in, if we follow that more and look to the future of how that relates to enabling people to have equality of opportunity, freedom, and so forth, I think we can hopefully be a political force again in Victoria, even though we have only been in government for 4 out of the last 24 years in Victoria.
Yeah, and I liked what you touched on there with the Liberal Party forming in like the 40 range, during after World War II.
Yes.
Talking about like the Labour Party in general. So my great grandpa and my grandpa were actually involved a lot in the Labour Party back in the 1930s and 40s. So my great grandfather was actually best friends with the former Labour Premier of the time, Edmund Hogan, in the 19.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Do you know Edmund Hogan, Chris? Or he
I
was
know the name, but I don't, of course,
yeah,
know
he
him.
was the premier during the Great Depression. So
Yep.
during the Premier's plan and that sort of thing. So
Yep.
I think the Labour Party kicked him out of the party. They kicked him out
Oh,
in,
really?
in
Okay. Well, you know more
1932.
about him than I do.
Yeah, because I mean, my grandparents know all about it because they were like best friends. Oh, Ryan's joined us as well. Yeah, so I'll just continue from where I was going on.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey
Hi,
Ryan,
Ryan.
how's it going?
Hi there. Sorry, bit late.
Yeah. I was just in the middle of
Better late
talking
than
about.
never, they say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Ryan. Chris. Chris, this is Ryan. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Hi, nice to meet you. Yeah.
Me too.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I was just saying, yeah, so my great grandfather was best mates with Edmund Hogan at the time. And I think after 1932, when they kicked him out, a lot of the Labour Party members in their local area. So my family originates from like Mount Edgerton, the land, that Gordon area, so just outside Ballarat. So a lot of the Labour members in the electorate were saying to my great grandfather, "You should run against Edmund Hogan now," because he had a lot of the members in the branch. They wanted him to run, but my
Okay.
great grandfather didn't run because he didn't want to go against his best mate. So
Yeah, okay.
yeah,
He was loyal to his friend.
yeah, he was loyal to his friend, even though they changed political parties. But yeah,
Oh,
then
well,
my grandfather.
maybe you can get revenge two generations on.
Yeah, because actually as well, my my whole family now, we distance ourselves from the Labour Party because of the 55 split.
Oh,
So
okay.
we were
Okay.
part of that. So my
So is your
grandfather.
grandfather still alive with you now?
No, he died in the 70s and 80s. So just
Oh,
when
okay.
Whitlam was getting, it was kind of sad because he died around the time the DLP was starting to deteriorate and starting to
Okay.
go down as a political
Must have
party.
passed away quite young then.
Oh no, because my dad married very, very late in life.
Oh,
So he
okay.
was
So it
like
was too
49.
late. Yeah.
Yeah, 49,
Yep.
50. So
Okay.
my
Okay.
dad was like an 18-year-old when my grandfather died. So
Oh, really?
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, my grandfather was involved in Labour politics too, and then towards the DLP. So he knew
Okay.
a lot of the former Labour leaders. So like Arthur
Yes.
Corwell,
Okay.
Ben
Okay.
Chifley, those sort of people. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Wasn't very much in Liberal politics at that time. He didn't. I
Okay.
mean, I don't think he didn't mind the Liberal Party after he left the DLP, after he left the
Yep.
Labour Party. But yeah, my dad got more in towards the Liberal Party after the DLP
Yeah. Okay.
went down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the whole political history.
There
Do
we
you have
go.
any political history in your family, Chris, or
No.
even Ryan as well? If you have any political history, you can talk about it, I guess.
No political
Oh,
history. Although my mother was born in Japarut, and so my grandfather had a farm near Japarut at a place called Alum.
Yeah,
And
that's
so my
yeah.
grandfather and my great grandparents who were in Japarut knew Menzies' family very well.
Yeah,
So
'cause-
Menzies' mother, I think Kate, had worked at a local general store and so forth. So they knew, everyone knew each other in town. So they
yeah, because
knew each other
Japarut's a
quite
very,
well.
very
But
small town, isn't it? It's not
it
very.
is, yeah. It's
Yeah,
smaller than Matoa.
I guess
Yeah,
Menzies would be pretty happy right now that you're part of the Liberal Party.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
But we were never involved in politics though, so I've got no family history. I'm the first in my family on all sides. Although my wife's family is a little bit different. My wife was originally born in South Korea and came to Australia when she was 3. But two of her uncles were members of parliament. One, I think, heads up the Alumni Association of Former Parliamentarians. One was, I think, a minister, or at least it was in the government of Park Chung-hee, the former dictator. So, I think one was heavily involved in the party wing as well. So quite involved in the politics in South Korea, at least.
Oh,
At least they formerly were.
yeah. And that's actually very interesting as well, because Ryan, I believe you're South Korean, aren't you?
Yeah, both my parents are from South Korea, but I was born
Oh.
here. And
There you go. I shouldn't have mentioned Park Jung-hee then.
It's fine.
don't know much about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot I
What's
don't
that,
know, you know. So
Yes.
maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Maybe there's
yeah,
a lot I
right.
don't know because yeah, a lot of this because you wanted me to mention my political history. Like I don't really have any. I do believe my family like may have some from overseas, but like I've only
Yeah.
no other family members have ever been in Australia. It's just us
Okay.
at the moment.
Yeah.
So
So
you
So
say
there
you got
isn't
South
like
Korean background on one side of your family?
yeah.
Through your mother or father?
Both sides. Both sides
Oh, both
is
sides.
South Korean. Yeah,
But
yeah.
do you speak some Korean?
I've I think I did way more frequently when I was younger, but now
Okay.
no.
Yeah, I'm not very good
I
with
should probably learn it.
because I haven't learned much myself. It means that we don't really speak much Korean at home, which means my kids are not learning. So it's my fault for my kids not learning Korean. I
yeah.
can say some things like basic things like 저는 크리스입니다. 만나서 반갑습니다. Like things like basic things like that. So yeah, like introducing myself. But then anyway,
Yeah.
my Korean is limited.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think my household would probably be similar to yours as well, Chris, because I'm half Filipino, half Australian. So my mum can
Oh
speak
yeah.
my mum can speak fluent Tagalog, but my dad can't. So it's always been like pretty
Okay.
hard for me to learn Tagalog and learn it
Okay.
specifically just because one parent speaks it, the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
So
We would have got some good fried food growing up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Not as good as I wouldn't say as good as Korean fried chicken, but I
Oh,
thought it was
that's
pretty
it.
good.
Yeah, see,
Fully
yeah, everyone
immersed in
agrees with
oil,
that.
good Filipino food.
Yeah. Do
Korean fried chicken.
you've had a lot of Filipino food over your time, Chris, or
I've had lots of different food over my time. Yeah.
what's
All
your
sorts of
favorite
food.
Filipino dish?
I can't remember, but I've had a fair bit of everything. My memory sucks in terms of names though, so I can't remember the names of Korean dishes. So yeah,
And your wife cooks them a lot as well, so
fair amount. Although the kids don't really like spicy food, so it tends to be
that's interesting.
pasta
Especially
and things
since
like that. So,
I
but
guess
they're only 8 and 4, so maybe we'll get them into it.
yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. All right then. I think we'll now move on to our final question. Ryan, do you want to ask the final question just because you just dropped in very late and I realize you haven't asked any questions to Chris?
and feel free to use any of that general conversation we just had then if you want as well. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great actually.
Those ways are fine. Like I think this can also lead to a general question, but
Yep.
I suppose what I want to ask now is finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are entering university or high school?
Yeah. I think try your best and never give up, irrespective of what they are striving towards. And don't be afraid to take a risk and don't be afraid to fail, particularly in politics. If you're not prepared to fail, sometimes multiple times, you may not make it in politics. You need to keep on trying, whether it's joining the party, running for pre-selection, running for election. Some people run for pre-selection election multiple times before they eventually get elected. So you just got to keep on trying and being persistent. And don't be afraid to change paths as well. Some people might think they want to do a certain thing when they start university, but realize it's not for them. I actually started off doing commerce and science to start with, and I switched across to law after a year and a half. So I had a change. So and don't be afraid when the door opens to actually walk through that door as well. Sometimes doors will close for a reason and doors will open for a reason. And sometimes when the door closes, you might think it's the worst thing in the world, but sometimes it closes and then you get a better opportunity that opens afterwards and you realize that it was good that that door closed for something else. So, and I think be open to new ideas as well and be willing to debate and I guess engage in critical thinking and creative thinking about things as well. Sometimes there's maybe too much of an encouragement to think in the same way and not allow for a contest of ideas these days. And just because you have a difference of opinion with someone doesn't mean you can't be friends with them. Allow that contest of ideas. And if you allow that contest of ideas, you get a better outcome at the end of the day. And one quote that I always use is actually from Sir Robert Menzies, where he says, in stagnant water, the scum rises, but in flowing water, it purifies itself in a few hundred yards. So a lack of ideas is like stagnant water. But if you have a free flow of ideas, it purifies itself and you get a better outcomes because you come to better solutions if you hear all different perspectives, even if it is perspectives on the extremes of both ends as well. It's a good thing. Yep.
Yeah.
That's my advice.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
really,
I
really
think
good advice.
that's a really good analogy about the water. Like, when it's stagnant, nothing really
Yes.
goes anywhere. And it's like, yeah, you want to make sure you always have that flow of ideas when you want to pursue
Yes.
something that you're very interested in. You got to keep moving. I think
Yes.
it's very
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely.
And also to touch on that, especially the bit when you were talking about how, nowadays everyone's kind of going towards one certain viewpoint and they don't like to disagree and agree with their friends. But I think it is really important as well that, you have disagreements and, you have your own opinions on things because, if everyone's just the exact same, has the exact same opinions on things, that's not going to be a good world we're going to be living in, increasing debate and increasing, sort of different opinions on things, makes the whole world think about their own choices. And it's not only does it help you amplify your own opinions, but it helps the world improve because when two people have two different sets of viewpoints, you of course will come to a certain agreement and will come to I guess a area where both sides are like.
But if you're not allowing those views to be expressed, then you create problems because you're only hearing one perspective. You're not seeing the other perspective, so you're not actually making exceptions for a particular rule or policy or things like that would actually cater for those issues that might have otherwise been raised. And I think these days as well, there's sometimes too much of a assumption of people's beliefs because of association with different groupings, or there's a guilt by association because you might be associated with one group or another group. So it's that sort of a groupthink or assumption of someone's views. I would encourage people to actually listen to a person's individual views instead of lumping them into categories, whether you lump them into a socialist or conservative or liberal or whatever category you want to put people in. Categorization of people sometimes doesn't allow for complexity and nuance in terms of the fact that people do have a variety of views, and one view could be on the left and one view on the right. So
exactly.
Allow for those views to be expressed and don't make assumptions about people's views, and don't engage in ad hominem attacks, which is just calling people names or engaging in straw man attacks against someone. Actually engage in reason argument. If you disagree with something, then don't just tell a person they're an idiot or something like that. Actually come up with a counter argument. If you engage in those sort of attacks, you've already lost the argument.
Exactly. I think it's a huge thing nowadays, especially when you see when you see on on social media, especially with like a lot of socialists and conservatives going at each other, even from both sides. A lot of them will just throw insults and that sort of thing and don't have logical arguments, stimulating their own viewpoints on things. So I think it is really important to steer away from just throwing insults and that sort of thing. It might look good when you say it for yourself, but when you look back at it and you understand that, like, in that argument, in that point of time, like, you're making yourself look pretty stupid because you don't have that sort of reasoning and understanding to back up your own viewpoints.
Yeah, that's right. And I mentioned that in my maiden speech at the state level as well, is people not engaging in attacks on all sides, whether it's calling people right-wing nut jobs or loony left or things like that, because that puts people into categories instead of actually... And it tries to silence those people instead of actually hearing their views on different points. Yeah.
Exactly. So those are I think that's coming to the end of our discussion. I think those are all the questions that we've asked. I'd like to thank you again, Chris, for joining us for the last hour and a bit. I realize you've got a lot of electoral and duties as a member for Mornington, so we really appreciate you. Me and Ryan both really appreciate you spending at least an hour with us and talking about your previous careers and your viewpoints on some certain issues. So thank you again for joining us for the last hour.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Francis, for having us and for your efforts with this podcast as well.